Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm David Berman, the director of the Indiana Suicide Prevention Network. We're excited for you to be here and for Silouan Green, who's an amazing speaker. I'd like to first, before we get started, introduce someone else. Chris Drapeau, Dr. Christopher Drapeau, is Indiana's incoming state suicide prevention director, and we are excited to have that position filled. That is effective on September 21st, next Monday. For those of you that don't know Chris, I'm sorry, we have somebody that somehow keeps sharing their screen, Paul Southwick. If you could please stop doing that. I'm not sure why that's happening. But Chris, I apologize. Chris earned his doctorate in 2016 from Ball State, his master's degree also from Ball State in 2012, both in educational psychology, and then he completed his training in clinical psychology as a postdoc fellow at Mississippi State. Chris is a university research professor at Valparaiso University, and directs the SAMHSA GLS, a Garrett Lee Smith Campus Suicide Prevention Grant that was awarded in 2018. He's been active in statewide suicide prevention efforts since 2009 as a suicide prevention trainer, coalition volunteer, co-founder, and leader of a regional coalition in East Central Indiana, and is currently, and I want to say he used to be currently a board member of the Indiana Suicide Prevention Network. Unfortunately, we have had to have Chris resign to assume this new position. So welcome, my friend, phenomenal individual in the suicide prevention world, Chris Drapeau. If you want to say a few things, and then Chris, we'll have you introduce Silouan.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate that. And I'm excited about this new position. Everyone, I just want to say briefly, I didn't want to take too much of Silouan's time today, but I just want to say as your new state director, I'm really focused on serving you throughout the state. And there's a few initiatives that I'm focused on broadly as I start this role on Monday. Strategic goal setting across the state, looking for innovative but evidence-based approaches, encouraging collaboration, improving the allocation of existing resources across the state. I know we have a lot of great ideas and great community agencies, organizations. I think we could band together to reach more people who are at risk or touched by suicide. And of course, bringing more funding to the state, because suicide prevention, intervention, and post-vention efforts are usually underfunded. So we'll be working very hard at trying to find ways to bring money in, not just through federal grants, but even community grants and other initiatives. And of course, serving you with everything I have is going to be my focus. And I think it's important that we're transparent, but also accessible, me being accessible. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat right after I introduce Silouan, because I really want you to contact me if you have ideas for how we can do this work, if you want to get involved. I want to make sure that we talk and that we work together, because the broad theme of this and other webinars that you're seeing through ISPN is suicide prevention is everybody's business, and I wholeheartedly believe that. So it's going to be an honor and a privilege to serve you in this new role. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Silouan. I want to introduce him and then give him the floor, since this is his show. So Silouan, he is an author, speaker, and former Marine. He has worked with first responders, veterans, and mental health professionals for almost 20 years on issues of resiliency, peer support, suicide prevention, and mental fitness. A survivor of a tragic jet crash as a U.S. Marine and someone who overcame severe post-traumatic stress disorder, Silouan understands personally what it takes to overcome the trials and traumas of life. And I also wanted to add that he is a husband and father of 9 who understands the battle we all face every day to live with meaning and purpose. So it's a pleasure to have Silouan with us today. And with that, I'd like to introduce him to start his webinar. Silouan.
Hey. Can you guys hear me? Am I unmuted? All right, I'm going to share the screen. Hold on a second. All right, it's not letting me. Let me do this again. Share the screen. There we go. Okay, Are we good?
We are.
Okay, I'm gonna get started. Hey, it's great to be with everybody. I was scrolling through the participant list, and it is awesome to see so many familiar names. That's always nice when you're a speaker because you know you don't suck, because if somebody's willing to watch you a second or third time, you must be doing something right. So thank you for all of you who have seen me present before or speak before, and welcome to all the new people. It was kind of a happy coincidence when David and Jason Murray got a hold of me to do this webinar, because about the same time that they were contacting me to do this, I was being contacted by somebody that I had not seen in probably almost 6 years. And I kind of wanted to share a little bit of that with you, because that's going to inform what I'm talking about in this webinar today. And I also think it's an initiative that every one of you is going to get excited about. It was about 6 years ago, and I was in Somerset, Kentucky with Adanta. They're a big mental health agency down there in the Kentucky area. And they had me come speak. And when I got done, this very energetic gentleman came up to me to shake my hand and say thanks for what I had done. And I had no clue who he was. It was a gentleman named David Covington. Some of you might have heard of him. Not only is he the president of a large mental health crisis company, RI International, but he's probably one of the leading advocates in the world for suicide prevention. He was behind the international initiatives Crisis Now, Zero Suicide. So we talked. He shared with me what he was doing, what he liked about what I had spoken about, and then that was it. I followed him on Twitter, which over the years, that's kind of been my relationship with him, is following what he was doing on Twitter and whatnot. And turned out he was doing the same thing. So just about the same time that I was contacted to do this, out of the blue, I get an email from David Covington. And he's like, I got this initiative I'm working on, and I really want to get you on board. Can you talk? So I hadn't seen him in 6 years. So we get on the phone, and he basically explains this new initiative that he had that he was going to call Changing America's Soul on Suicide. Now, as one of the leading people really in the world on suicide prevention, he was telling me about this group that got together probably about 10 years ago in Washington, D.C., that was part of some government task force for suicide prevention. It's where Zero Suicide came from. And he began to tell me about all the goals they had then and how excited they were for all their ideas in suicide prevention and all the money they were going to raise and all the things they were going to do and whatnot, and the enthusiasm they had a decade ago doing that. Well, just recently, earlier this year, before COVID hit, they had all gotten together, and it was to sort of celebrate the 10 years of these huge initiatives and the improvements and suicide awareness and this and that. And he said, as he's sitting there, he realizes as he looks at the numbers are worse. We got more suicide. We got more depression. There is more of what they were fighting against. And David told me he started asking himself, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating ourselves, or are we celebrating the impact? And if there's an impact, what's the impact? And then that led him down this road to question sort of historically what we have done for suicide prevention and how we've talked about it. And when he's in that meeting, I won't give the name, but there was someone in there, PhD, very experienced in suicide prevention. And basically the conversation arose as they were talking about why these numbers were getting better, that it was almost like there's just some people who are the ideal profile for suicide, and if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And, you know, most people are never going to go down that road, and that's just kind of the way it is. And David said he heard that, and he immediately thought back to the talk I had given 6 years before that. And in that talk, one of the things I had said was, anyone can be broken. Now, there might be some people in some groups that, you know, they got a higher risk, but everybody's risk is above zero. And he said he thought about that, and he thought about my talk and about the way I had explained that. And he just sat there, and he wanted to speak up, but he knew that it wouldn't be received well. And as we're talking, he really wasn't sure where he wanted to go or what he wanted to do with the initiative. And one of the things that we talked about, one of the reasons there's kind of that attitude and is that, you know, suicide really in many ways has become something that other people get. There's this suicidal type of individual, and we want to put labels on it. And it makes it somebody else's problem in a way, that we don't approach this like we do a lot of other things in society, where it's like all hands on deck. It's more like, yep, there are these people over here and they have these issues and these problems, and, you know, they are more likely veterans, police officers, you know, middle-aged men with crises, young kids with, you know, bad parents, but whatever. And that's not really it. It's all of us. It's everybody. And what we are doing hasn't worked. And in reality is to go, is more money and more programs really the answer, when we've had more money and more programs for 10 years or longer and all the problems are worse? And those are hard questions to ask. Those are hard questions to look in the mirror. You know, one thing I really hope to do today, and it's good timing, you got a new director. Things have changed a lot with COVID, is I would really ask yourself, is the answer really just more money? Is the answer really just new programs? Or is the answer, have we been doing this right? Is there more we can do? To be really honest, to be really frank. Now, the answer to some of that might be yes. Some of what we've been doing is works. You know, over here, this works. Over here, that works. But to really look in the mirror, and that's what David wanted to do. So we started talking about this project. David started getting people on board. I was very flattered to be the first person, you know, he contacted. Subsequently, we got Dr. Thomas Joyner on board. I'm sure any of you that work in suicide have heard of him. I mean, arguably the best known suicide researcher in the world. He's out of Florida State University. He wrote the book, Why People Die by Suicide, very influential book over the last 15, 20 years on those things. So they got on board and we began this project to change America's soul on suicide. Now, what it's going to consist of is 7 short documentaries that we're going to unveil over time. And then when all those are done, which could take a year or longer, we're going to put them all together in one documentary. The documentary on me is going to be the first one, and it's sort of the narrative that's going to be the thread through all of them. Just recently, David and a film crew were here in Indiana. They followed me around, came to my house. I talked to them. And not only was it a really cool experience, but it also, again, the timing was great. It helped me think through how I want to begin to talk about this. What I want the message to be that people hear from me as far as changing America's soul on suicide, so that we can better respond, we can have better outcomes, that we can use the resources that we get in a better, smarter, more impactful way. So great timing, David. Thanks for having me. And I believe mine is going to be coming out at the end of this month or possibly next month. So I'll make sure all the powers that be know that, so that when it does, you can check it out. Suicide is everyone's problem. Now, what has happened? You know, you see this in the world. It's not just a suicide prevention thing. It's kind of a world thing. You know, stereotypes, stigmas, labels tends to make it somebody else's problem. I see this a lot when I'll go to areas and I'll talk about veteran suicide. I'll talk about police officer suicide, you know, 2 of the topics I deal a lot with. And you'll hear this a lot. People want to make it somebody else's problem. Oh, it's the VA's problem. Why isn't the VA doing more about veteran suicide? Or it's the state problem. You know, why isn't the state doing more about suicide? And what I try to tell people is, it isn't the state's problem. It's not the VA's problem. It is your problem. That is your next door neighbor. That is your friend. That is your uncle. And I think part of the reason that happens is we're very reactive to suicide. I mean, think about one of the, you know, biggest suicide initiatives there is. Here's a 1-800 number if you think somebody's suicidal. That's honestly pretty reactive, because if somebody's suicidal, it took them a long time to get there. Okay? A lot of water has gone under the bridge to get to the point that someone is suicidal. And while I'm all for 1-800 numbers and looking for the signs of suicide, I wish people understood more how suicide develops in the first place, to help our loved ones keep from getting there and ever needing the 1-800 number. Because that is life. And I think one thing that has sort of exacerbated that, to go back to what I said in the beginning, that we tend to see things as someone else's problem. You know, a community response to suicide is everybody. It's not just the professionals. It's friends, it's family. You know, all of you know this that have studied psychology deeply. I mean, probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, risk factors for any mental health condition that develops is lack of social support. That's it. You know, you got close friends, you got people you got close relationships with, you got people that the minute something happens in your life, you can get on the phone and talk to them. Sure, all the things we talk about could develop, but you're sure at a lot lower risk. I remember once a friend of mine who was mental health director for the Air Reserve, and I was doing a yellow ribbon event, and we were talking, and one of the things I was doing was a couples retreat. And I was thinking about this, and I asked her sort of a rhetorical question to see what her answer was, but I said, how many people have you counseled in the last year that have a happy marriage? Like, marriage is great, but life sucks. And she couldn't think of anybody. You know, relationships are important. We focus on relationships. We focus on community. You'll be doing suicide prevention. You'll be making this not somebody else's problem, not the VA's problem, you know, not some council on suicide prevention's problem, but we'll be making it everybody's problem. And that, to me, more than anything, is what it means to change the soul of America, the soul of Indiana, the soul of everyone watching. It's everybody's problem. It is everybody's issue. And then what's making it worse now, which is why lately, I mean, you see all these statistics on suicide rising over the last 6 months, and I see it myself. I was recently just in Texas, and I had someone in my class who was a crime scene investigator who investigates suicides north of Houston. And she told me that before COVID, she would investigate 2 to 3 suicides a month. The first week of the lockdowns, she had 6 in 1 week. And ever since then, they've had 2 to 3 a week, where they used to have 2 to 3 a month. And she said the most alarming part of it all is the greatest rise they've seen is in young people, teenagers, early 20-somethings. And I think in many ways, COVID has kind of exposed the danger of some of the things prevalent in society today. Social media, political, social division. We're divided. We've never been more divided. You know, one thing I hope that y'all will have a discussion about in your suicide prevention efforts is, what can you do to be a catalyst to bring people together, to show people that we are not as divided as it seems when you look on TV or you go on social media or you think about people's politics. As long as we remain divided, we'll never confront these problems very well. We got to feel like we're in this together. And something like suicide, that I think no matter what your politics are, no matter, you know, what your beliefs are, you can pretty much agree, suicide bad. Let's do something about it. You would think that suicide prevention would be something that we could get everybody on board with and help educate them and help them to understand that it is everyone's problem. It is not just the doctor's problem or the state's problem or the VA's problem. It is everybody's problem. Now, I had an interesting meeting that sort of gave me some data for some of these things I'd been feeling, for some of the things that David and I had been talking about. I just did a class, and I had police officers from around the state of Indiana there. And it just so happened there was a unit, which is very rare. Elkhart County has got a murder investigation task force, detectives from different agencies, and they investigate all the murders or potential murders in their county. Well, one of the cool things they do, from my point of view, is every single suicide in the county gets investigated. So whether it was obviously a murder or a stage thing, or it was obviously a legitimate suicide, they investigate it. And obviously, having them in a class for 3 days, I was filled with questions because, you know, you can read a ton of papers by PhDs, no offense to the PhDs watching, who have never been to the scene of an actual suicide in their life. And that can tell you one thing. But man, when you're talking to the people that actually walk into that house and talk to the families and, you know, pull the body down or investigate the trajectory of the bullet wound or look at the suicide note for the first time, man, you can learn a lot. So in the couple of days talking to them, couple of things I was really interested in was, you know, what is the typical demographic? Is it all veterans killing themselves? You know, is it all, you know, 50-year-old men with midlife crises? Now, of course, I knew that wouldn't be the case, but you still want to know. And it was very clear after talking to them as they went through case after case over the last 6 months, that suicide happens to everybody, all backgrounds, all ages, all demographics. People commit suicide. And especially since COVID, it's been a lot of young people. It's been a lot of people in their 20s or even younger. And that was reassuring to hear because, again, you know, you hear enough of these studies and you hear people talking about at-risk groups and who we need to focus on. You know, you really do begin to think there's like this profile of a suicidal person. And while there is statistically, when you see it on the ground, it's our sons, our daughters, our husbands, our wives, our grandpas. It's business people. It's Amish people. They're up in Elkhart County. You know, it's veterans. It's police officers. It's retired police officers. It's doctors. It's lawyers. It's mothers. It's teenagers. It's everybody. It's everybody. Another fascinating thing, and this got kind of to the core, one of the reasons I think people don't want to talk about suicide, why they want it to be not just something that somebody else takes care of, but they also wanted it to be something that doesn't happen to me. It's not going to be me and my family. And they volunteered this information as we were talking. They said, one of the detectives, you know, he was talking about his sort of like, you know, preconceptions of what suicide was before he got on the task force and what it was now. And he said one thing that surprised him was 35 to 40% of the cases, the families denied that it was suicide. They couldn't. He described all kind of crazy twists of logic that families would come up with, that it was a murder or it was staged or it was an assassination or just crazy stuff to avoid the reality my loved one committed suicide. And he said again and again, you know, they would just have these attitudes. Well, it can't be us. That can't be my son. It can't happen to me. You know, is this suicide just goes so against our self-preservation instincts. You know, as a parent, how can you not feel like you failed your child? You know, your child killed themselves. How can you not feel like, oh my goodness, that can't be that? You know, there's so many reasons in a way that we want to deny the reality of suicide. We want to deny what happened. And I think that's part of the reason we want somebody else to take care of it. You know, I got a large family. I got 9 kids. You know, you want to think, man, I've done a good job raising them. They could never think of that. That can't happen to me. And in a way, to get involved with suicide prevention is to say it could happen to anybody. It could happen to one of my kids. It could happen to one of your kids. It could happen to somebody that you love. And again, to read studies, to go off my own anecdotal evidence is one thing, but to hear someone that investigates that many cases of suicide year after year, to talk about the deep denial within us that suicide even happens, much less how it happens, it just reinforced we've got to change America's soul on suicide. We got to get everybody to see this in a deeper, more personal way. And then the last thing he brought up, that I'm going to share a lot with today in this talk, was this. You know, he said one thing he had always thought, but in investigating suicides especially, because a lot of times, you know, he would go into these homes, people were living alone, he would see a side of people that nobody else saw. You know, because part of that investigation is like going through their emails, going through their computers, going through their house. And he said one thing he discovered about himself, about others, investigating suicides, is that all of us have got 3 lives. We got our public life, we've got our private life, and we've got our secret life, the life that no one knows about, the life that others might think they know us, but they don't. As he was talking about it, it made me think of a friend of mine who's the state fire marshal in Michigan. And he's had me do a lot of trainings there for the fire departments. And when we were talking once at a training I was doing, he said, I had a old mentor tell me this once, and I've learned that it's true. He said, everybody's got something they're never going to tell anybody else. And I was like, yep, that's true. And that's kind of what he's saying. And I bring that up. I think it's important. We think we know people, but we don't. We think the public perception of people is the truth, and usually at best it's like a pale reflection of the truth. And suicide and the development of suicide lurks in the deepest, darkest places. And if we just wait for those deep, dark places to become public, what good do we do? Okay, we got to help people get out of the dark. We got to help people get out of the secret. And to do that, we got to make this normal to talk about. We got to get everybody involved: friends, families, parents, churches, teachers, pastors, everybody. Now, when you look at these three lives, I thought of it as he said that: the public, the private, and the secret life. I thought of myself. I thought of myself back to when I was suicidal. I thought, what was my public persona growing up? I was an athlete. I was a Marine. I was funny. Okay, I was popular. That's how people saw me. Some people probably thought I was arrogant. Some old girlfriends would probably say a whole bunch of bad stuff about me. But in general, I had a public persona, and it was developed over time. Some of it was true, but what a lot of it was meeting expectations. It wasn't true. It was, I saw how people affirmed me in different ways. And so I thought, well, I better act that way to be affirmed. I better act that way to have friends, to be accepted. And so over time, there was a layer to me where there were plenty of people who thought they knew me, but they didn't. And I think that's important to recognize, because all of those people would probably in a million years think to go, man, what's going on with him? How did that jet crash affect him? How did that affect him? How did that impact him? Because, hey, I'm the athlete. I'm the funny guy. I'm this guy, blah, 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 blah. It's a huge, immense danger for our youth in this digital age. You think of kids that are constantly putting pictures up, Snapchat, Instagram, look at me, look at what I saw. It is a constant, never-ending battle to meet expectations. When I have the opportunity to talk to young kids who are going through depression, who are suicidal, it's amazing to hear them talk about, it's 3 a.m. and their parents are asleep and they're looking at stuff on their phone, and it's making them feel like losers. It's making them feel like they don't measure up. And then it just contributes to a society that wants to stereotype and label everything. I think my biggest pet peeve, where sometimes I feel like I'm swimming against the stream today, is I hate labels. I hate them. I know why we do them. I know why psychology loves labels, to diagnose somebody. But, have you ever really looked through the DSM, how many of those labels, like 80% of them, the diagnosis is the same? I mean, seriously, how many diagnoses in the DSM does it have some version of affects them socially, occupationally, and blah, blah, blah? Okay. But I know why we need labels. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-label in that sense, but I'm anti-label. And it's like, we've all become that. Labels can become a curse. There was an article a few years ago, Time Magazine did, and they did a study of veterans, and they found that the average veteran had rather be diagnosed with cancer than PTSD. And when you dug in the study and you read some of the interviews, you discovered that the reason that was because of the stigma that came with it, the label, what people thought about us. See, part of changing the soul America is showing people suicide is not a label. It's not a label, okay? It doesn't define you. It's not necessarily who you are. It's just a way to describe what happens when someone kills themselves, and the route and the development that gets somebody there. Well, you know what? That could be all of us. You know, one of the things that's interesting when I've talked to people, especially those that said, you know, for years, I would have never imagined I could be suicidal. And it's because I think with most people, suicide doesn't begin with, I want to kill myself. Suicide begins with, man, I don't want to wake up. I want to get out of this, but I can't. I need answers. I need a way to escape. Now, see, those are all thoughts that can take you down the road to suicide. But because we see suicide as a label, and suicidal means you're thinking of killing yourself, and we don't really explain it well and how it works, for a long time, you can be going down that road and think, well, that doesn't apply to me. And it's a lack of understanding. So we got to work hard, especially when talking about suicide, that not only do we label things properly, but we explain what they mean and we go beyond them. We transcend them, okay? We show people how we're all in this together, and a label shouldn't divide us. A label should just be there to help us understand each other better. But, you know, I never look at myself as someone who is suicidal, or another one of my pet peeves, you know, a veteran. You know, I never wake up and go, I'm a veteran. You know, you see all these initiatives, help veterans. Well, veterans are as different as you and me. You know, I don't wake up and think, oh, I used to be suicidal, or I'm a veteran. I wake up and go, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a speaker. I'm a basketball coach, okay? There's a lot more that I have in common with people who aren't veterans and who have never been suicidal than they would ever imagine. Yet we forget that sometimes when we fight these things. Those are the things that bring us together, our commonalities. Then there's our private life. It's the life, you know, that people don't see, although, you know, the life that's real behind the Facebook pictures that we show everybody. It's our family, it's our faith, it's our friends, it's the deep things, it's the important things. You know, it's the things that truly can sustain us, that can help us when we're going down the road to suicide. Yet unfortunately, they're getting overwhelmed by the public show, the public life that I just talked about, and they're getting overwhelmed by the pain. Because what is happening to our secret lives? They're becoming more secret. You know, where I work in a shared space in Kokomo, a place called Inventric. Before COVID, before the lockdowns, you know, I travel a lot, so that's why I use it. So I can come here, you know, pay to have an office, high-speed internet, conference rooms, all of that. But if I'm traveling and I don't need it, I don't have to be paying for it. Well, before COVID, I would come here, and it's an old executive building, I believe of Chrysler or something. I bet in a day I'd see 30 to 50 people in and out, going down the hallways, talking. Since we've opened up, okay, since anyone that wanted to come here could, the average day is a couple of people, a handful of people. I can sit in a room that used to have 15 people in it, and it's just me. Something has been altered inside us by these lockdowns, by the reality of it, by the unreality of it, okay? The legitimate fear, the illegitimate fear. All of it combined has changed something. And I hope we come out of it. But if we don't come out of it, one consequence of it is it is allowing us to sink deeper and deeper into what my friend from Elkhart and I called the secret pain, the secret life. Now, when I was suicidal, what did that mean to me? What were the things going on secretly inside me that nobody saw? It was depression. It was how self-critical I was, how self-critical I'd been my whole life. Now, there were times in life that being critical of myself didn't make me depressed. It made me excel, made me get good grades, made me want to be a Marine, be a pilot, okay? But when I was depressed, when I jet crashed, my back was broke, all of a sudden, it led to bad stuff, to loneliness. You know, on the outside, funny guy, speaker, talker, seemed popular, but on the inside, I was lonely. You know, probably sometimes the loneliest place to be is in a room full of people. You're around a room full of people and everyone thinks they know each other, but you feel like you're all alone. And you know when that got worse was after the jet crash. I remember, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. But really my suicidal ideation started when that secret life was allowed to become sort of the totality of my life, because I had to go to a hospital away from my base. I didn't have my friends around. I didn't have my family around. I didn't have anybody to take me out of that. And the loneliness fueled the depression. It fueled me being critical of myself. And you're seeing that now. You know, so many people now, all those things that were there, that secret life, they're now being fueled by isolation. They're being fueled by COVID lockdowns and restrictions, the unknowingness of it, the lack of control of it. Okay, you can see it. I just drove through downtown Indianapolis yesterday. Businesses afraid to open because they're not sure how long the lockdown is going to be, or they're afraid to open because they're not sure when's the next riot. And so there are all these businesses with like plywood over the windows. And then what happens? They're at home, and it fuels the secret life, the place where we have our addictions, our depressions, our shame, our guilt, our pain. I think one way to change the soul of America, the soul of Indiana, I think one way to do real suicide prevention is to talk about how all of us have this secret life, and deep within it, we've got addictions that people don't know about. We've got depression that people doesn't know about. We have things we've done in our life, we feel shame. We have things we've done in our life, we feel guilt. We have pain that nobody sees. And see, all of those are the things that can lead to depression. And rather than telling people, well, wait till you need the 1-800 number, we tell people, hey, if you're like me, if you're like all these people I know, and you've got this secret life, you got these things you're afraid to talk about them. Realize you're not alone. Understand that it can be all of us. See, to me, that's when you'll see real change, I believe. That's when you'll see people who start healing long before they get the gun to the head, long before they're putting the exercise band around their neck, long before they're deciding, what am I going to do to kill myself? They're opening up. They're understanding we all got this secret life. All of us. Every one of you watching does. There's not one of you watching right now that doesn't have something in secret. Now, it might not be all consuming. It might not be right now, but every one of you in your lifetime has had something in secret that you were ashamed of, that brought you fear, that you were guilty of, that was pressure you put on yourself. And if you do, if you've had that secret life, you know exactly what it's like that many people go through when they begin the road that leads to suicide. Labels. Quick thing on labels. I've brought that up before. You know, but in this world where everybody has a public face, everybody's a label. I mean, look at Facebook. I mean, to register to Facebook, you got to be a label. I mean, Facebook, social media exists to make us label, to find out what makes us different so they can sell us stuff. I mean, they've got the capability now that you and your wife could be in a room. They know you're on your phone and she's on her phone. They see what you're looking at. They see what she's looking at. And then they see she's interested in buying something. And they use that to send you a message to try to encourage her. Hey, honey, look what just came up on my phone. And then that is reinforcing what she is thinking about buying. Well, when you're getting that specific with technology, you're trying to turn everybody into a marketing device. You're trying to give everybody a label. And what they find when they study people, the greater your consumption of social media, the more lonely and isolated you become. The longer that you're on social media, the more divided you feel. The more friends you get, the more separate you feel from people. I don't know exactly how we do this. I think it is a conversation. How do you talk about this? You know, everybody's got a phone. Everybody's on social media. You know, I'm not a troglodyte. I don't think that, you know, technology is all bad, because it's not. I mean, it's enabling us to be together. It enables me to do my business. You know, it's not all bad. You don't want to come across that way. People are going to tune you out. But we still got to find a way to have a discussion on its impact, to have a discussion on our incessant labeling, you know, on what happens when every, you know, especially in mental health, when everybody's just a diagnosis, when everybody's just a label, where everybody's just over here. You know, what do we do to have the other discussion to talk about what unites us, to talk about, what brings us together? One thing some of you've probably heard me talk about is, in a way, our pain unites us. Our brokenness unites us. The things that we have in our secret life unites us. Mental health, in my opinion, big part of that should be showing how we're all connected. How we're all connected. And we know it's true. Anyone watching who's a counselor, it's true, because what's the go-to therapy for everything? Cognitive behavioral therapy. But whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy for couples, cognitive behavioral therapy, for, PTSD, process therapy, EMDR, whatever, if you look at the core of what it is, it's very similar. It's very similar, okay? And what should that tell us? That all the conditions that we're using it for are all similar, way more similar than we would probably want to admit. And we got to use that knowledge to let people know you're not a label, you're not alone, okay? We are united by pain and struggle. We can't allow ourselves to be divided by it. Now, probably my hero in overcoming this, getting to what do we do about it? How do we explain this to people? How do we understand it better? Is the great Dr. Viktor Frankl, wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. I've got a whole training I do, different theories of suicide. I talked a little bit about that last year, but I just want to focus on this one thing because I think it's the easiest for the average person to get their head around. A life without meaning leads to despair, which leads to suicide at its most hopeless. One of the things that Viktor Frankl talks about is to live is to suffer. It just is. You live your life, you're going to have pain. You're going to have struggles. You're going to get old. And the thing that helps us through it is meaning. Why do we, the new director talking about, going back to school, he got his PhD in 2016, or David taking all these jobs. What allows somebody to do what you got to do to get your PhD? What allows somebody to put on 3 hats? It's meaning. It's purpose. When you want to sleep, when you want to be in bed, but you got to study, it is meaning. And the second you lose meaning, it's not worth it to do that stuff. And you see that with people that get depressed. You see that with suicide. When you lose your meaning, all of a sudden, things that before you could withstand, you can't do it anymore. You can see it in marriages. You fall in love with somebody and the sky's never been bluer and the sex has never been better. And, think of what that means to say, I want to marry somebody. That means I want to be with you till you're dead. I want to be with you till I'm dead. Okay? Why? Because it's meaningful. Now, if any of y'all ever been through a divorce or a bad relationship, when it's lost its meaning, how many things about that person make you mad? How many things about that person depress you? We start reading thoughts. I know what you're thinking and it's horrible and I hate you. And it's that meaning thing. And I think we don't talk about that enough. How do we help people lead meaningful lives? Because flipping on your phone is no meaning. That's one of the biggest lies in society. People talk about all the good that comes out of the phones, but most people don't use it that way. One of my favorite things to do when I travel is to look through airplane seats or look over people's shoulders when they're on their phone and to see what they're doing. And obviously it's different than what they're doing when no one's watching, but you know what they do spend most of their time doing? Playing stupid bubble games, Candy Crush. That's what they're doing. A completely mindless activity that has zero meaning. They're not getting a hold of their kids or having discussions with their spouses or their girlfriends or their boyfriends, and they're not reading Bibles or books. No, they're playing Candy Crush. Okay, that's our problem. It's meaning. And then what happens when you live that way? When you're in Candy Crush world, you're at home, you're alone. You're thinking of your secret life, your failures, your pain, your depression, your guilt. You know what happens? I call it lonely logic. Suicide is the conclusion of lonely logic. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you thought a monster was in your closet and you're in bed. And as long as you stay in bed and you're alone with that fear and you look in your closet, the monster gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay? It's lonely logic. It makes perfect sense. All right? Perfect sense. And it's not until typically like mom comes in, You tell her what's going on, and she opens up the closet, and you see, oh, there's no monster in there, that you're okay. Well, that's what happens with suicide. See, typically, suicide is, an individual thing, obviously, but typically, suicide is preceded by a lot of pain, physical or emotional pain. Typically, it's long-term, and then there's acute event. When I was talking to the investigators at Elkhart County, they told me that if the suicides or there were suicide notes or they could get information from the family, almost every single one fit this profile. The person was in long-term pain, physically or emotionally. So it could be a young kid with a lot of emotional pain from bullying or something. It could be somebody older with a lot of physical pain. And then typically there was like an acute event that happened that kind of set off the actual suicide. They get bullied at school, they get called a name, they got somebody break up with them, they lose a job, a loved one dies, whatever. And what happens with this lonely logic, as this pain is developing, you're looking for answers, you're looking for ways to deal with it. But because we tend to do it on our own, we have these secret lives, we're not dealing with it by getting feedback from other people, we're dealing with our own, and then the pain gets so great and everything you've done hasn't worked, or maybe you've tried things like alcohol, cutting yourself, whatever, and then at the end of that road, lonely logic leads you to the conclusion, suicide is my only option. Suicide is my best option. And in that moment, it makes perfect sense. And it's one of the reasons so many people that commit suicide, you'll talk to people that just saw them and they're like, well, they seemed fine. They seemed at peace. You know why? Because they finally came up with an answer. They finally felt like they had a solution. And when they did, the pressure they were feeling subsided and they went through with it. That's the danger of lonely logic, but that's why community, everybody being involved, focusing on meaning, focusing on what do we do to create resilient kids, resilient elderly people, resilient veterans? What do we do to help them build their lives in a way that makes them resilient? This stuff won't develop in the first place. He had an equation for healing. Despair is suffering without meaning. What I'm going to focus on with the time we got left, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. I'm going to give you some things to do. My challenge, and I'm going to be really frank right now. Okay, my challenge for Indiana when it comes to suicide prevention is this. Along with all the sort of basic things you need to be doing, people need to be aware of resources. People need to be aware of the 1-800 number. People need to be aware of what's there for them. But in addition to that, what can you do to help people understand the importance of meaning, of relationships, of community in their lives, all of us? Okay, and then what can you do to facilitate that? Because nobody get mad at me, but if all you do is spend more money on what you've been doing, you're probably going to end up where my buddy David Covington is, which is, gee, look at all the money we spent. The statistics aren't any better. And you don't want to go there. You don't want to be there. You don't want to have that moment of realization. Now, that's a discussion, okay? That's probably a long talk. There's lots of different ways to do it. There's things you do statewide. There's things you do locally. There's things you do marketing-wise, media-wise. There's things you do grassroots-wise. I'd ask you to think really hard about that, especially over the last 6 months when I see how bad suicides have become. Over the last 4 years, you've heard about police officers being killed in the line of duty. The last 4 years, more police officers have killed themselves than have died in the line of duty. More active duty military have killed themselves than have died in combat in like the last 5 years. I think it's time to be frank. I think it's time to piss people off. I think it's time to look in the mirror and go, what are we doing? Is it really just more grants and more money? Because that's what we've always done. What is it? Ask yourself those tough questions. We live in a great state. What I love about Indiana, traveling around the country, we are a state, probably unlike many others, where people of different opinions still can come together. Where you can still sit down at a table and have a Democrat and a Republican and an independent and have a discussion. Very few places are that way. It's becoming harder and harder to have these discussions where we don't just talk about what we've done, we talk about what we've done wrong. Where we don't just listen to our own ideas, we listen to other people's ideas. Where we're honest about where we are and how we've got there. I really think in today's culture, in today's political divide, what you do as a response to suicide and COVID, what you do as a response to that, the discussions you have could be a light to people all over the country, all over the world. I really believe that strongly, especially now. You know, there I was in Kentucky 5 or 6 years ago, just giving a talk to some people I didn't know, not knowing who was in the audience. And, you know, and I'm getting ready to be behind this humongous suicide prevention initiative that I believe in, that I think can change people's lives. And it started just trying to do the right thing, just trying to help people, just trying to let people know you're not alone with no hope where it would go. Well, do the same thing. You got a lot more resources than just one dude. You got a lot more people on board than just one guy. You have these discussions, okay? You work together in ways you haven't done before. You involve people that maybe in the past you wouldn't have involved. You just watch where that goes. You just watch the number of lives that it impacts and what you are able to do. So that 5 years, 10 years from now, instead of patting yourself on the back for all that you did, but nothing really changed, something changed. And it's because of what you did, okay? It's because of you took the work you've done the last 10 years, you looked at the good, you looked at the bad. What can we do different? What can we build on it? And you moved ahead. Mama said I was a preacher. I just preached to you guys, so forgive me if that was too strong. All right, now real quick, time we got left. I want to, you know, people usually want to hear my story, and I kind of get sick of telling the story the same way all the time. So I'm going to kind of go over my story for those of you that haven't heard it and for those of you that had, in light of what I'm talking about today. This idea of our public life, our private life, our secret life, this idea of, you know, being broken and being suicidal, and before you even realize that you're suicidal, and then ultimately the kind of community and relationships that heal, okay, getting outside of the label, healing us. Growing up as a kid here in Indiana, my dad was a pastor. That obviously gave me a public label. I'm a pastor's kid. When I was young, people were like, oh, you're a preacher's kid. You must be a goody-goody. That led to a secret life where I didn't want to be a goody-goody. I didn't want that public label. On the flip side of it, that public label of being a goody-goody preacher's kid also got me some things, made me respectable to people. So it was kind of this struggle between this public and this secret life, where the public life was, yeah, I want to be the person that goes, yeah, look at that guy who's the athlete and the A student and blah, 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 and he's a Christian and he goes to church and he's a good guy. And then the secret part of me that was like, screw that, man. Man, I want to have fun. I don't want to be that. I want to be a little bit naughty. And I guess there's a few people in my private life that knew the naughty side of me. But the naughty things that I did, okay, looking back on it, when I joined the Marine Corps and I was broken, those naughty things, okay, that ability I had learned to keep some things in secret almost killed me. Now, the public part of me, which was also a bit of truth, you know, I was an athlete. I love physical activity. Got good grades, led me to go into college at Vanderbilt University, Nashville, Tennessee. While I was there, saw a recruiting poster for the Marine Corps, and it had a picture of a Marine standing next to an F-18, and that appealed to my ego and that public image, and ended up joining the Marine Corps. And it fed into this idea, this public persona of be tough. Man, life's all about being tough. Life's all about sucking it up. One consequence of that, parts of my secret life or parts of even my private life I didn't want people to know that didn't meet that image, I didn't talk about. I love to write. I love poetry. But that didn't quite fit the image I had, so I didn't talk much about it. I didn't do much with it. When I was a little kid, I remember I kept a diary. I wrote poems in it. When I was about 8, my parents had these couple come over to babysit me and my brothers. And when I went to go write in my diary, they started making fun of me. They got a glimpse of my secret life. You know, secret's not all bad, by the way. It's just those things that are personal. Only we know them. And they got a glimpse of that, and they started making fun of me. Girls writing diaries. What's your problem? Are you a sissy? And I put that diary away, and I never wrote it again. And I had 2 things in my secret life. You know, one of them was I liked to do that, and I didn't anymore. And the other was just the pain I felt. And it was a battle. So, I joined the Marine Corps. I got that picture there as a young, tough, in-shape guy. And even though that public persona, there was some truth to it. I was tough. I was a Marine. That wasn't all I was. That isn't all who I was. I was still that little boy that wanted to write poems. I was still that preacher's kid that had faith but didn't practice it, that ran from it, ran from my faith, ran from God, ran from those things. But that was still part of who I was, but it didn't fit my image, and so I didn't follow it. And so when I had my jet crash and I got broken and my friend died, that thin exterior, that public image, when it was shattered, I felt like I was left with nothing, because all of a sudden, I had this public image of like, look at me, look how tough I am. And when you're young and you're tough and you're Marine and people look up to you, you can kind of get away with that, even though that's kind of thin. But all of a sudden it shattered. And now, because all that other stuff I had kind of forgotten or left behind or not paid attention to, and I didn't have my faith, and I didn't have those things I love to do, all of a sudden when I looked in the mirror, instead of being, a 20-something young man with my whole life ahead of me, I saw myself as this just broken person. That's who I was. That was my label. And what's interesting, looking back, I was on the way to being suicidal, 100%. Things were happening, isolation, pain, looking for answers, things that were leading to me to see suicide as a problem. But what's interesting, looking back, I did not have my first thought of maybe I'll kill myself until I got labeled as having PTSD, and a psychiatrist told me to my face, you're a high suicide risk, and I want to get you in public treatment here because you might not live 90 days. And then he wrote it on a piece of paper and showed to my command. And it was literally, when I got that label, that the thought entered my head, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself. Now, I understand why they did it. It was a necessary thing. But the thought did not enter my head until I got that label. And then because I lived my life just being this label, this is people's public perception of me. Well, now that the public perception of me, because it was out, was suicidal, broken Marine, that's all I thought I was. Couldn't sleep. As I couldn't sleep, I got wore out. As I got wore out, I got depressed. As I got depressed, I didn't work out. As I didn't work out, I got more pain. As I got more pain, I didn't sleep. Had a flight surgeon that eventually gave me open scripts to Percocet, Vicodin, and Zoloft, made me feel like a loser. Didn't tell the hospital he had done that. Didn't tell my family or friends I was taking all those drugs. My secret life was overcoming my private life. It was becoming my public life, which made me want to hide even more. Ultimately, I'd be dead if it wasn't for someone that showed me that's not who I was. It was this psychiatrist. She just got to the hospital where I was in San Antonio. I think she saw the crazy Marine running around and she wanted to talk to me. I would go there for anything because I was there temporary active duty. I was there so long that anytime I went for an appointment, I'd get like extra money. So I'd show up for anything, sign the piece of paper, and, get my extra $25. So I hear that she wants to see me, and I go to the appointment, and, I feel horrible that I felt this way then, but I just did. I was this young Marine. I didn't want to be at this Air Force hospital. I walk in, and, her uniform is all kind of like, at least to me, looking sloppy looking. I'm like, oh my God. And, she seemed really old, which now seems really young. She was like 35, which at the time seemed old, but now if you're 35, trust me, you're a puppy if you're 35. And she's kind of overweight. She's kind of heavy, wasn't real attractive. And I was just like, oh my God, what does this person know about being a Marine? But she saved my life. And what's interesting at the time, she wasn't hamstrung by how many times I could see her or insurance or all that. I could see her whenever I wanted. And more than anything, she built a relationship with me. We talked. I would go see her all the time. And in doing so, one of my biggest stressors, things that came out was, right now, I think the only thing holding me together is this identity of I'm a Marine and I'm still getting paid and I still look like one. But when I lose that and I go home to Indiana and I'm doing some job that sucks and I don't like, I just remember thinking, Doc, there's no way I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole and pull the trigger and kill myself. And she said something to me that at the time kind of seemed silly, but in many ways it informs everything I do today. She knew about the little boy, the me when I was young, writing in the diary, being made fun of. thinking that to be a man meant you had to be a hard ass, not writing a diary. And she looked at me as I said that, and she said, what would that little boy do? What would that little boy do? And that question saved my life. That question led me out of suicide, because I thought to myself, that little boy wouldn't put a bullet in his head. That little boy would write something. And that stuck in my brain. And a couple of nights later, like we tend to do when we have these issues, we do things to make them worse. You know, the more isolated and alone and anxious and depressed you get, you do things to make it worse. So I'm alone in a coffee shop, smoking and drinking, feeling sorry for myself. And one of my triggers for my PTSD was the weather. You know, if my accident happened when it was a really stormy night, very high humidity. And for years after that, right, storm clouds in the sky, right, humidity, I just feel myself start getting anxious. So I'm in this coffee shop and I started to hallucinate the storm. And in that moment, I talked to Dr. Lanzano and I said to myself, okay, I could do what I would normally do, which is go home and put a gun in my head. Or what would the little boy do? He'd write something. So I asked the waitress for something to write with. She gave me a pencil. I grabbed the napkin off the table and I wrote this poem just as quickly as I'm going to read it to you. Took a storm to crack the mortar, the stone, the aged clay, the walls I'd built to shield myself from rains I feared to face. Took a storm to clear the rubble, the remnants of my home, to find the lost foundation poured before I dwelt alone. And the waters flow, so today I think I'll swim. And what that meant to me is I had a choice. I had a choice. And ultimately, you know, for any mental health condition that develops, any mental health condition that we still have the ability to control our thoughts, which is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy and every derivative of it. Cognitive, how I think, impacts how I behave. And if my thinking's coming up with bad behavior, I need therapy, okay? Everyone gets there eventually. I thought to myself, that's right. My choice is I can put a gun in my head or I can live. One thing I'd always wanted to do is play the guitar. Started playing the guitar, still do. Maybe one year I'll do this and play a song for you. Other thing I'd always wanted was a motorcycle. Didn't have one, always wanted to do it. But I'm like, you know what? I want to live. Sold my car and I used the money to buy that KLR 650. And while I was still doing bad, man, you know, I still had bad nights. I still had times I put that gun in my head. But as I waited for my disability discharge and I was moving forward, I had moments where I felt like I was alive. I felt like I had moments that I wanted to be alive, not dead. That the most attractive part of the equation was 1 + 1 = life, not 1 + 1 = death. And the day I got disability discharged from the Marine Corps, I left on that bike a KLR 650. Now, the truth is, I had an angel on one shoulder. I had a devil on the other shoulder. The devil was telling me, ride to the middle of nowhere, someplace like that picture. Head off into the wilderness where nobody can find you. Take that Makarov 380 out of your tank bag, put it to your head, pull the trigger. What a poetic way to go. The other part of me, the angel, was saying, man, you ride until you got a reason to live. You ride until you got a reason to live. I ended up being gone for 23 months, almost 30,000 miles, all over the United States, never stayed in the same place more than 2 weeks. What that represents to me is ultimately to live, you got to overcome fear. You got to find possibilities that you didn't think existed. You got to find answers. You got to find meaning when your life you feel like has been destroyed and there is no meaning and there is no purpose. And there's lots of tools that can help you with that. Lots of psychological tools. There's drugs that can help you with that. But at the end of the day, to live, that's what you got to find. Now, one of the cool things that came out of this, one of the things that's going to be talked about in the documentary that David Covington and Thomas Joyner are doing, which is kind of cool, is how I found my family, how I went from being alone to not alone. At one point on this trip, I met some people down at Indiana University, and I met this girl. At the time, I didn't really know her that well. And a friend of mine is having a welcome home from the Marines party for me. And it's all these young people, and, you know, and we're all having a fun time. And, you know, there's this girl I'd met earlier. And one thing I remember as I'm at the party is when I was a student at Vanderbilt, one place I always wanted to go was Memphis to Graceland, but I just hadn't gone, and it wasn't that far from Vandy. So I'm sitting there, and I got all these college kids, and classes don't start for a week, and I'm like, hey, who wants to go to Graceland with me? Well, I got my mom's car. We'll get in the car. You know, we'll go to Graceland. And All these college kids raised their hand at the time. But by the end of the night, the only person that still really wanted to go was this girl I'd met earlier. So we get in my mom's car, we drive all night, talk about everything under the sun, and we get to Graceland. And at first, I mean, it ended up being a great trip, but at first we were kind of disappointed. I don't know how many of y'all been to Graceland, but basically the actual house looks like some ranch that some redneck put a second floor on, which it kind of is. And then there's all these big outbuildings, which all this stuff's in, and huge visitor center. And so while we're sitting there waiting for the place to open, kind of feeling like, man, we came all the way for this, like out of a bad Elvis movie, this tour bus pulls up. And we're sitting there waiting who's in the tour bus, and the doors open, and we find that the tour bus is filled with Japanese tourists, every one of them dressed like Elvis, every one. And they pile out and get in single file line waiting to get in, and we got Elvis from all eras of Elvis life, the majority of them, 70 Elvis, you know, with the big collars. I learned years later that Japan is the biggest Elvis impersonator club in the world, and I guess like once a month they send a plane load of Elvises over to Graceland, which Lord knows how many people that's going to be when COVID's over that come over that haven't been able to. So we got to visit Graceland with Elvis. We come back. We're so tired, it's almost a blur. It's a couple of weeks later. And at the time, I had kind of been stuck in Indiana. That's one reason I had my mom's car. I got stuck, and it was unseasonably wet. It was one of those summers where there's an El Nino in California, and Indiana's really wet. You know, normally in August, things are getting burnt and everything was green. And finally, there's a break in the rain, and I could head out west to some places I hadn't been yet. So I get on my bike and I take off. But before I do, I go down to Bloomington to see some people I had met. And I see this girl, and I tell her what I'm doing, and she looks at me, and now she argues to this day whether it was me convincing her or her convincing me, but I'm going to stick with me convincing her. And I told her what I was doing, and she said, well, that's funny. I was going to take the semester off to go to Colorado to be with some family. And I was like, well, you should come with me. We'll have more fun. And she said, okay. And so on a motorcycle, not really meant for two people, we took off. And ended up riding almost 6,000 miles all over the West. Never stayed in the same place more than a couple of days. We were just riding and riding and riding. This is us in the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. That's the actual Grand Canyon. That's not exactly where we camped. We were up in the National Forest from there a little. That's where we stayed the longest. We'd get up every day. That would be our view when we got out of the tent. That's on the way to Devil's Tower in Wyoming. That was the main road going to Devil's Tower. We sat there for like an hour and a half, never saw another soul, just sitting there looking over the horizon, smoking cigarettes. The result of that is what's the date today? In 2 days, thank you, David, for doing this so I can remind myself, we will have been married 22 years. And what you're about to hear is not a typo. We've got 9 of those right there. This is all of us, most of us, at France Park and Logansport. I got 5 boys, 4 girls. Oldest is 21. Youngest is 3. This is actually a place I went with David. We filmed there. It was pretty cool. Got me and some of the kids cliff diving before they blew the horns at us to stop, which was kind of nice. Now, the reason I show that when I give talks is one reason. You know what I was doing 6 months before I met my wife? I was sleeping with a gun in my head. And if you would have told me, oh, life's a journey, I would have punched you in the face. If you would have said to me, hey, man, come to the suicide prevention thing, I wasn't going. You would have flipped a 1-800 number on the TV. I would have said, that ain't me. I ain't calling. What the hell are they going to know? It took people. It took community. It took friends. It took Dr. Lanzano that built a relationship with me, didn't just do worksheets. Not that I'm totally against your whatever flavor of worksheet you like to use, but she built relationships. It was people. It's my wife. It's my kids. You know, I'll give talks on suicide or PTSD, and people will come up to me and they'll say, you talk like you used to feel that way. How's that possible? And I'll say to them, you know what? The memories are always there. The feelings are always there sometimes. I said, you know, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I'll have this thought come over me, and it's a pain I felt before, and I don't even know where it comes from sometimes. And it'll say to me, put a bullet in your head. And the pressure and the pain and the desire and the feeling that it's an escape is so real. If you were standing there on top of me with a gun, I'd probably tell you to pull the trigger. But then in that moment, I see my wife laying next to me, and I think of my kids. I think of the work I get to do. I think of people like you that I get to meet, that I get to work with, that I get to share my life with, and I go, it's okay. Life's okay. And I'm all right. It's been a long time since I put a gun to my head. It's been a long time since I thought I couldn't overcome it. Arguably, some of the things I've gone through since then are worse than that. But it's meaning, it's people, it's community. It's creating a life that won't allow me to be alone, that keeps me alive. And that's what we got to help people with. Okay, we've never had more therapies. We've never had more drugs. We've never had more awareness. We've never had more money spent. More people are depressed. Now, one might argue, well, you might talk to some researcher. Well, that's only because we're more aware of it. And well, so what? There's still a lot of freaking people depressed. Okay? What has changed over the last 30, 40, 50 years? We have more resources, but less community. We got more evidence-based practices, but less families, less friends, less contacts. We have more people alone. We have more people sitting at home. That's our fight. That's our battle. Are you willing to enter that battle? Are you willing to go against 6-year-olds with phones? Are you willing to fight it? If you're not willing to fight it, you got to ask yourself, how much impact am I going to have? It's about community. It's about relationships. It's about each other. It's about changing our soul. That's why David Covington used that term. That's why Thomas Joyner got on board. It's not about just new research, new therapies, new this, new that. It's not just that, although I'm all for that. More money for that, great. It's also about changing our soul. Looking deep. Asking ourselves those hard questions. Now, real quick, before I finish up, I want to kind of show you something I've used for years that kind of says that same thing in a graphic way. This is kind of my definition of suicide, depression, PTSD, whatever you want to call it, okay? All of us are somewhere on this ladder, okay? And the box in the left, that's a place that you don't want to be. That is someone that is so consumed with fear, pain, depression, guilt, shame, anxiety, whatever, that they've run out of choices, they've isolated themselves, they're not getting help, and they're just like this black box. It's hard to get out of that box alive. It's like a firecracker in your hand. You put a firecracker in your hand and you light it, you still got your hand, you're okay. You put a firecracker in your hand and you make a fist around it, you're going to lose a finger or worse. When all we do with our pain and our trauma is this. Now, up there in that house, the names in the house are just kind of random things people could do with their life, but all of us know one or two people in our lives that are so resilient, you could put them in the middle of the desert with nothing, and they might not like it, and they might not be happy about it, but they find a way to have some peace with it, okay? And I 100% guarantee you this is what their life looks like. The foundation of their life is a clear purpose. It's actionable. It drives them. Purpose is that thing that makes you stay up all night when you're getting your PhD. Purpose is that thing when you want to get out of debt, you eat beans and rice, and you put cash in envelopes to spend. Purpose is that thing when you first fall in love with somebody, you want to be with them forever. And it orders the rest of your life. So the rooms of the house are based on your purpose. And the person all the way up there at the top, there's no rooms missing and there's no rooms that don't belong. Very few of us get there. And not only that, we live in a world today, media, technology, advertising, they only make money if we put new rooms in our house. They only make money if we're distracted from things that are important. They only make money if our house gets more and more complicated. But the person who's learned to get all the way up there to the top has eliminated anything that's not built on their purpose. And the roof of the house, which is I'm calling all of you to action to do, is the humility to look in the mirror and to be honest about what we see, about what we've done. See, the person all the way up at the top, they understand they can't do it alone. That you can't control the weather, you can't control politics, you can't control viruses. You can't control how much money you're going to get from the government or how much money you're not going to get. And because of that, you can't do it by yourself. And all of us are on that ladder. And some days we're going up and some days we're not. Some days we're keeping our priorities straight. We're listening to our loved ones. We're spending time with our kids. We're doing all the things we need to be doing. And other days we're not. We're caught up doing 3 jobs. And even though when you die, no one's going to care about those 3 jobs. The only person alive that's going to care about you is your kids. You spend no time with your kids. And a year can go by like that. Or 10 years can go by like that. And we go down the ladder. And life, going up that ladder, is putting that house in order. Now, what happens in sort of a graphic way with suicide, depression, all these things? We all got a room. To go back to the beginning of the talk, we all got that secret life. We all got that room we put things that we want to lock away. We all have that thing that we're never going to tell anybody. It's one of the rooms in most of our houses. And typically, it's somebody else's problem. We don't have that room. They do, but we got it. And that room builds up pressure. And if you get enough pressure in that room, and it builds, and enough bad things happen, or one really bad thing happens, or maybe you were kind of keeping it together and then COVID happened. You know, maybe you were being bullied and you were cutting yourself, and then all of a sudden COVID happens and you're alone and you got even more time to be on the internet. You find other kids that cut themselves, and some of those kids talk about killing themselves, and some of those kids talk about ways to kill yourself. And the next thing you know, you are practicing putting a rope around your neck. Whatever it is, maybe a spouse dies, maybe a friend dies, maybe you get old, maybe you lose a job, but whatever, and that room goes, the pressure gets too great, and the room goes boom. The room becomes the house. You see that little black box to the left? That used to be a house. And in my experience, ultimately for long-term resiliency, before you become suicidal, after you're suicidal, before you got PTSD, after you got PTSD, healing from it, the key is building that house, building it on a clear and actionable purpose, a life of meaning. It's my family, it's my faith, it's doing this. What did I tell you I think of when I think about putting a gun to my head? It's my family, it's my faith, it's doing this. And then you order your life by that, okay? From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And then you got the roof that protects you. That's the humility to look in the mirror and to be honest about it. To me, that's what that means. That is changing America's soul. Not looking at people as labels. Your suicide, your PTSD, your depression, your schizophrenia, your bipolar. But looking at us all as people. That if we have lives built on meaning, just like Viktor Frankl said, we can overcome a lot. We can turn our suffering into something special. We can keep our suffering from allowing us to descend into despair and suicide at its worst. And it don't matter what your sex is, what your race is, what your class is, okay? When we focus on that, we will make a difference. We will change lives. We will make an impact. We'll be able to look back in 10 years and go, look what we did. We changed people's lives. Last year when I spoke, I gave you a challenge. I'm going to give you the same challenge, and I added to that challenge because it needs to be reminded. Maybe some of you left last year and these challenges impacted you. Maybe now with COVID, isolation, increase in suicide, depression. Maybe hearing it in this format, but maybe it'll be a little bit easier to act on these. Challenge number 1, I want you to leave here as individuals and approach 5 people who look alone and start a conversation, wherever you are. Okay, even in a mask, even if it's 6 feet away, or a stranger online, or a family member, or whatever, at work, wherever. Okay. 2, reach out to 3 people you know have struggled, but you haven't kept in touch. 3 people in your life, high school, college, family, that you know there was a time that struggled, because guess what? Even when you seem like you're doing good, that stuff's still there. Our secret lives. And reach out to them. Ask them how they're doing. 3, be vulnerable with your own demons to 2 other people who don't know them. Let your secrets out. You struggle with addiction. You struggle with low self-esteem. You struggle with cutting yourself. Whatever it is, share it with somebody. Share it. Get it out. 4, organize, and this is new from last year, organize forums, and this is something your new director could talk to you all about doing. Organize forums, roundtables, small groups, webinars to tell the stories of suicide in your community. That's what we're doing with our documentary. Through telling people's stories, we want to show people that not only can you prevent suicide, you can heal after going through all that. Put a face to the problem. Don't just make it about prevention and the signs, but show the hope that can come from overcoming it. I wouldn't have the life I have today if I hadn't been suicidal. Now, I would never wish that on anybody. To this day, I wish I hadn't gone through it. But their hope came from it. We need to show people that. We need to have this discussion. Do it. Think outside of the box. Invite churches. Invite doctors' offices. Invite dentist offices. Do it in schools. Have conversations on these things. Put a face to it. Try to show people this is all of us. Ultimately, suicide prevention is loneliness and isolation intervention. Period. That's what it is. No more now, more than ever. Okay? The demons grow in the dark. It's never been darker. We need to show them the light. It is an honor to be with you all today. I want to thank David, Jason especially, who got me on board doing this over the summer. Anyone wants to get a hold of me, share any feedback, up there on the screen, I got my website, silouan.com. My Ladder Up program, I got that. And then also, I've been doing this really since COVID started. I think I'm up to like 130 episodes. I've got a podcast. You can get to it through a link on my website, or it's the pilgrimsodyssey.podbean.com. That's where it's hosted. Or if you Google, or if you just put the Pilgrim's Odyssey into iTunes or anything, you can find it. And I warn you, that's kind of spiritual. So if you don't like God talk, don't go there. You won't like it, but you might like it. That's all I got. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and I guess David or someone can wrap up, and we can see if there's any questions. And there you go.
Yep.
Peace.
Double
peace.
We're very close to end time. So why don't we do this? If anybody has any questions, if you'll put it in the chat box, or you can email Silouan directly. He gave us contact information. But if you put it in the chat box, we will make sure that it gets to him. And when you access the presentation itself, which you will get once you fill out the evaluation, if you've attended any of our webinars before, you know you will get a link for the evaluation. After you complete that, we'll give you the online presentation. But if there are any questions, we'll make sure that that's included in there. So feel free to stick around for a few minutes, type anything that you want in the chat box. Otherwise, thank you. Look for the evaluation. Silouan, pleasure as always. You're phenomenal, and appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom and your story. And we will see everyone next month as we look at the intersection of suicide prevention and intimate personal violence.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Thank you.